Welcome to RHI's Sociable City Interviews, where we meet with global thought leaders on nightlife and the social economy. Today we are joined by Carrie Christophas, the Executive Director of the National Liquor Law Enforcement Association. In this role, she is responsible for overseeing the administration, programs, and strategic direction of the organization. Prior to her current role, she served as the Deputy Director at a single county authority where she managed the comprehensive drug and alcohol prevention plans across 3 counties in Pennsylvania.
Hey, Carrie, great to see you.
Great.
Great to see you, Jim. I'm grateful that you're taking the time today to do this interview with me. I really want to, first of all, help to clarify. Well, first of all, just begin with a little bit of your background and what your current role is.
Yes, so my background, I come from a law enforcement background, so public safety and then also public health. But I have been with the National Liquor Law Enforcement Association for about 7 years. But I bring more than 20 years of experience in nonprofit management. Like I mentioned, 6 years as a commissioned law enforcement officer. Um, and throughout my career, I've managed numerous federal, state, local grant initiatives, including the Drug Free Communities Grant, Stop Back grants, tobacco funding grants, gambling grants. I am from the state of Pennsylvania, so I've worked with the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board in grants as well for law enforcement. And a lot of those grants were focused around reducing underage and high risk drinking.
Oh, okay. So you did work in Pennsylvania.
Yes,
Yeah, we have one of our state demonstration projects there that we're putting into place.
I was reading about that.
Yeah, yeah. So I know that there's Prohibition created two distinct systems of alcohol regulation, and two groups have formed: the National Conference of State Liquor Administrators and the National Alcohol Beverage Control Association. So NABCA's members, are kind of unique in some ways, as is the National Conference of State Liquor Administrators. But how does your organization differ or overlap these two kind of networks of alcohol regulatory agencies at the state level?
Okay. Well, let me give you just a little bit of background about the National Liquor Law Enforcement Association. So, we are a nonprofit professional association. We represent about 1,700 members from federal, state, tribal, and local agencies. Most of those agencies are directly involved in alcohol regulatory enforcement and alcohol related public safety. So our members are mainly officers, investigators, chiefs, directors, and administrators who are doing the day-to-day work of compliance, investigations, and enforcement in our communities across the country. So we do work closely with organizations like NABCA and the National Conference of State Liquor Administrators. I could also throw in even Center for Alcohol Policy kind of in that group. A lot of our focuses are the same around alcohol policy, control systems research, regulatory administration. But I would say NLLEA is different because we are focused mainly on the practitioner. We are centered on enforcement and training and professional development for those in our field who are responsible for ensuring compliance, conducting investigations, and protecting public safety. So there is some overlap in our membership. I know some of our members attend their conferences and meetings. I do as well, but each organization has its own niche. But I think together we form a strong collaborative network to ensure alcohol is promoted, distributed, and consumed in a legal and responsible manner.
Well, it seems then your members kind of have a pulse beat, a pulse of what's going on as it relates to alcohol, venue compliance, patron behavior. But what are some of the challenges that your members see right now within their role And how would you describe some of the ways in which they're trying to tackle them?
So yeah, so some of the challenges, I mean, we're still seeing challenges around over-service, impaired driving, the growth of delivery and to-go alcohol sales, staffing shortages in both law enforcement and licensed establishments, and increasing complexities in alcohol laws and regulations. But although we're also seeing more focus and attention on compliance checks, because of coming out of COVID, we are seeing some, increases in that, which is good, and increase in prevention around underage access. But also, there's always a need for better education for both licensees and officers because alcohol is such an evolving, um, the laws and trends around alcohol are always evolving. So we have to stay on top of that.
Well, it must be quite challenging because there are so many new variations of how people can access alcohol. And obviously in the two different systems of the state, particularly as it relates to spirits, where you purchase and how you consume alcohol varies. But you also have a lot of trends with outdoor dining where during COVID, you had to modify off-premise consumption rules and regulations. Now you have these entertainment districts, as they call them in California, social districts like in North Carolina, where there's permission for a patron to take an open container into the public space, which typically has always been a violation, and in some cases, even in those areas, moving outside of those areas with a public alcohol consumption can also still be a violation, even though it's permitted within certain areas. And then you always have the constant battle over closing time hours and now, like you said, the home delivery and concerns about access of alcohol to underage people through the home delivery systems. It's certainly becoming a much more complex world for your members to try to keep up, and then to always be challenged with people saying, well, this state is allowing this. Why doesn't our state allow this? And then throw into that the whole trend towards cannabis. There was just some recent articles about how weed will become the new liquid, with THC infused beverages. So the complexity for your members, I mean, just keeping up with what is the rules and what are not the rules and how are these social norms changing must be quite daunting.
Yeah, most definitely, Jim. I mean, and you brought up, THC, the hemp derived THC beverages. That's one of the fastest growing segments in the adult beverage space. So, trying just to stay on top of those trends, and at the same time, they present regulatory challenges and public safety challenges because the laws and controls do vary widely from state to state. And some of that challenge is just that regulatory landscape is inconsistent in those areas. So this creates, real concerns around access and labeling and enforcement. We try to provide as much education around those topics as we can with our membership. We do have chiefs meetings. We have a professional development committee that stays on top of these issues. We do offer webinars consistently on these topics to stay educated and up to date on these things.
Now, we've worked in dozens of cities throughout North America, and consistently we find that there's sometimes both kind of gaps in communication between the state regulators and the capacity of the state to provide enough law enforcement to address some of the problematic establishments, which can sometimes lead to frustration on the part of local officials because while they're told that the state is responsible for regulating alcohol establishments, enforcement sometimes doesn't always fall into their jurisdiction in the same way. But the staffing shortages, like you said, of alcohol law enforcement could make one person responsible for hundreds of venues throughout a particular city, and that creates some challenges. So, how do you see that kind of link between the state and the locals, and what are you as an organization trying to do to help educate the local law enforcement about taking on a greater role or perhaps working to make some modification to the state regulations so they have more control over what goes on within their own cities?
Yeah, that's a good question and a lot to unpack. A huge part of my role here at NLLEA is to ensure that we remain the national voice of alcohol law enforcement professionals. And, one of the initiatives that we are working on is referred to as ACT, Alcohol Compliance Training. And so that training, one of the premises around that is to bring together all those involved with alcohol law enforcement. So, every state is set up differently, whether that be your state patrol, it might be your city, police departments, and then also, there's also the alcohol regulatory body. It just kind of depends how that's all set up in your state. And so the alcohol compliance training that we're working on is to kind of create a standardized, high quality training program for all law enforcement and regulatory personnel. So it's focused specifically on alcohol laws and compliance and enforcement practices. So the objective of that is to improve that consistency and enforcement, communication among all those entities, increase officer knowledge and confidence in alcohol related cases and laws, working with licensed establishments, reducing those harmful outcomes like underage sales and overservice, and then ultimately improving public safety and community trust. Again, we say it all the time because alcohol laws vary so widely and can be so complex. We do feel that this program does fill a critical training gap. And I can give you a little example of that. We haven't fully rolled out the program yet. We are working on a training of trainers. That is our next focus for this program, and then we can kind of disperse everybody out. But over the summer, we did kind of do a project with Nebraska and through their coalition project Extra Mile. And so that brought together the Nebraska State Police, who oversee enforcing the alcohol laws, and the Nebraska Liquor Control Commission, who is that regulatory body, and then the local police departments. We also even had officers at the training that are school resource officers and game commission. And so it's important to bring together all those entities so they can understand what their role is in alcohol compliance and enforcement. And then just that communication gap that might be there. When they're planning these outdoor events or there is an entertainment district. And as you know, even with your academy, how are those entities communicating with each other? How does one person know that, you are allowed to walk around with a cup of alcohol, and can you cross this street, and can you cross this line, and do you have to wear a bracelet, and what is the compliance measures around that? So just making sure that everybody's on the same page, I think it is so important and so helpful, and that's something that ACT training is going to help us to get out to our states.
So it sounds to me like your training is focused more within the compliance networks. At what point do you feel that this training might also be modified to be much more specifically oriented to the venues?
Yeah, good question. In this project we did in Nebraska, one of the elements of the training that we did was doing a compliance, going in and doing a compliance check in a bar restaurant, and the owner allowed us to come in and allowed us to walk through that with them and show officers what it is that is being looked for when we do those compliance checks. So that was very helpful. And then that communication with that a licensed establishment and the owner to the law enforcement and what they kind of expect from enforcement as well. So, we do have that element in there, but it is something that we're going to need to add more of that into there.
Hmm. Hmm. Now, one of the things I've noticed too in our work is that, again, it varies from state to state, but increasingly, state regulatory entities keep being added new responsibilities, or they have responsibilities on issues that are emerging that haven't been emerging before. For instance, sound is clearly one of those issues in nightlife districts where you have mixed use, where you have residentials in close proximity to venues, and the venues engage in entertainment that create disturbances. And like in Pennsylvania, it's the state liquor control board that's responsible for sound enforcement, which really limits the role of the local community and city to actually, take their own independent action and have to engage sometimes, like we mentioned before, limited staff for the liquor law enforcement to be engaged in sound management. And so you have some of these overlapping responsibilities, and we brought up also the THC and how that's being given to state regulators, or in some cases, you have the whole gaming world that can often be associated with the state regulators. And so you're really kind of trying to put together a McDonald's that has fish sandwiches, chicken sandwiches, and burgers, but not necessarily, have a clear path to make all of these things work together.
Yeah, and I mean, you definitely bring up some good things to think about, and I think too that's where, in these types of trainings, you have to have people from zoning involved as well. So when we are going to set up these trainings in a state, for instance, um, we set up several planning calls before we would go into a state to do any type of training. So we're trying to get every entity possible that would be involved in that type of, event and or, need to be at the table for those discussions. So I know your nighttime managers would be great as well to have in those trainings and have involved in those discussions. So just having everybody at the table, I know it's hard to do and it's a lot of pre-planning. Like I said, when we set up these trainings, we have several calls with the enforcement entity that oversees that alcohol enforcement regulation, the regulatory body. We ask them to bring in all their police departments as well, at least to have one representative in those planning meetings, just so that we can have as many people at the table as possible, so that when we're going in to do these trainings, um, everybody feels like they have a say, and everybody feels that they're involved, and have buy-in to what we're doing and the training.
Oh, okay. Well, we're getting close to the end here. This has covered a lot of ground, but when you look forward to the program itself, it seems like it's also helping to be a catalyst for uniting the various state regulatory entities and to get them to begin to see themselves as really more in line with each other to perhaps work on some of these challenges together. So it sounds to me like this training could accomplish more than just bringing knowledge to those involved in law enforcement, but could actually help to facilitate broader partnerships, not only within a state or within a city, but between the states and their approaches to compliance. And I find it quite interesting that you have alcohol compliance training versus enforcement. So it seems like you're taking a more positive approach to working with the venues that's not just about enforcing, but also increasing education and training for compliance.
Right, right. Yeah, and that enforcement compliance terminology. I mean, I think it is important that we do use, we are the enforcement. Sometimes we have to be the heavy hand. But realistically, our goal is to bring everybody into compliance uh, first, and educate so that we can be in compliance. And you did bring up partnerships. So yeah, the Alcohol Compliance Training or Act is being developed. It is a partnership with the NLLEA and the National Alcohol Beverage Control Association, NABCA. So yeah, and we anticipate strong participation from state and local alcohol enforcement agencies, law enforcement departments, regulatory bodies across the country. We also see opportunities to collaborate with organizations like yours, Responsible Hospitality Institute, Sociable City Summit, highway safety offices, other public safety and prevention partners who share the goal of reducing alcohol-related harm. So that partnership piece is very important.
Well, this has been great, Kerry, and it's pretty exciting what you're doing. It's certainly obviously a demonstration of your community coalition work, your law enforcement work, and your advocacy of something that's really important. So you've kind of blended your different career paths into something that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, most definitely. I've always said when I took on this role with NLLEA, it is a great combination of all the work that I've had through enforcement and through prevention. So it's really exciting to have this new project to work towards.
All right. Well, thank you, and I wish you good luck.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay.